The silence they gave me, they didn't push me away loudly. They didn't scream, they didn't fight. They simply stopped reaching, and somehow that hurt more. It began with silence, not the peaceful kind, not the kind poets romanticize. This was a heavy silence, a suffocating one, the kind that presses against your chest and dares you to breathe. One day the voices faded, messages stopped coming. Laughter no longer echoed my name. Doors didn't slam shut, they were left half open, just enough for me to see what I was no longer invited into. I stood there waiting for an explanation, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to say, "You matter." No one did. Loneliness isn't beautiful when it's forced on you. It isn't poetic when it's undeserved. It's cold. It's humiliating. It's realizing you can disappear in a room full of people and no one will ask where you went. I watched friendships decay without a funeral. Trust cracked quietly like ice beneath my feet. Love didn't leave in a storm. It withdrew slowly, carefully, as if I wouldn't notice the warmth draining from the room, but I noticed. Every unanswered call, every delayed reply, every look that slid past me as if I were already a ghost. I tried to understand. I searched myself for the flaw that made me disposable. Was I too intense, too quiet, too real for a world addicted to masks? I didn't know yet. All I knew was the weight, the unbearable weight of being unwanted, of being tolerated instead of chosen, of standing at the edge of everyone's life, never at the center of anyone's heart. They erased me gently, no confrontation, no closure, just absence. And absence is cruel because it leaves room for hope. Hope that maybe tomorrow they'll return. Hope that maybe today was a mistake. It was. I didn't choose solitude. Solitude chose me. It wrapped itself around my days. Sat beside me at night, spoke to me in the quiet moments when distraction died and truth whispered. I didn't feel strong then. I felt confused, small, replaceable, but something began to stir beneath the hurt. A quiet rage, not explosive, not loud, patient. Because when the world takes everything from you, voices, warmth, belonging, all that's left is yourself. And that's when the silence stops being empty. Labeled, judged, left behind, they needed a name for me. People always do. Something simple, something small enough to dismiss. So they called me strange, cold, distant, dangerous. Not because I was cruel, but because I didn't bend the way they wanted. Not because I was empty, but because I didn't perform my pain for their comfort. Being misunderstood cuts deeper than hatred. Hatred still sees you. Misunderstanding erases you while pretending to explain you. They didn't ask who I was, they decided. They took fragments, moments, silences, and stitched together a story that fit their fear. Whispers followed me like shadows, not loud enough to confront, just loud enough to isolate. They smiled to my face, wore masks polished with politeness, then turned away and warned each other quietly. Be careful, something's off. He's not like us. They fear what they cannot control. They fear death. They fear stillness. They fear anyone who doesn't need their approval to breathe, so they pushed me to the edges. Gave me space disguised as concern, distance disguised as respect. Isolation became my sentence. No trial, no defense, just a verdict passed in glances and half-spoken thoughts. I watched the crowd move as one, laughing together, agreeing together, judging together, safe in numbers, safe in noise. And there I was, one mind, one voice. One presence that didn't echo theirs. They judged, they whispered, they walked away. At first, it poisoned me. Bitterness settled in my chest like ash. Resentment burned quietly behind my eyes. I wanted to scream, "You don't know me." I wanted to rip off their masks and force them to look. But then something shifted. I noticed the pattern, how anyone different was slowly pushed out. How the crowd survives by sacrificing those who don't blend in. I wasn't the first. I wouldn't be the last, and that realization changed everything. Because if the price of belonging was shrinking myself, if acceptance demanded silence, obedience, and imitation, then exile wasn't a punishment, it was an invitation. They thought they were casting me out, but all they really did was remove the noise, and in that quiet I began to see clearly. The weight of empty rooms, there are nights when silence becomes too loud. When the absence of voices screams, when your own thoughts circle you like predators with nowhere else to go. I sat alone with them. No distractions, no noise to drown them out, no one to interrupt the questions I had been avoiding my entire life. In empty rooms, time stretches. Minutes feel like hours. Heartbeats replace conversation. Breathing becomes the only proof that you still exist. I watched my phone stay dark. No names lighting up the screen. No messages asking if I was okay. Just unanswered hope slowly losing its strength. Silence is a mirror, and it is ruthless. It shows you every fear you buried. Every flaw you blamed on someone else. Every wound you pretended had healed. I saw myself clearly for the first time, not the version I showed the world. The raw one, the exhausted one, the one who was tired of pretending he didn't care. The loneliness pressed down on me, heavy, relentless. It made my chest feel smaller. It made my thoughts darker. There were moments I almost broke. Moments where giving up felt easier than enduring another night alone with my mind. Moments where disappearing seemed kinder than surviving. I questioned everything. My worth, my direction, whether being different was a flaw or a curse. No validation came to save me. No reassurance softened the edges. No hand reached out to pull me back, and that's what made it unbearable. When you're alone, there's no escape. No applause to distract you, no approval to lean on, just truth, unfiltered, unforgiving. I learned that solitude doesn't ask permission before it tests you. It strips you down. Layer by layer, until there's nothing left to hide behind. And in that exhaustion, in that hollow stillness, I stood at the edge of myself. Not strong, not brave, just present, barely holding on, because before solitude becomes power, it breaks you first. Rage with nowhere to go anger came next, not the explosive kind, not the kind that breaks rooms and scares people. This anger had nowhere to go, no one left to fight, no one left to blame, no faces to scream at, no doors to slam. Just me and the fire building inside my chest. I was angry at the silence, angry at the labels, angry at myself for ever believing I needed permission to exist. But with no target, rage does something strange. It turns inward, it tightens, it sharpens. At first, I thought it would destroy me. I thought the pressure would crack my ribs from the inside. I thought I would drown in it. But I didn't. The anger didn't scream. It whispered. It asked questions I couldn't ignore. Why do you need them to approve of you? Why do you break when they walk away? Why does their absence define your worth? Those questions hurt more than the anger itself. I paced with it, sat with it, carried it through long hours where sleep refused to come, and slowly something changed. The rage stopped spilling everywhere. It stopped burning randomly. It stopped wasting itself on memories and imaginary arguments. It condensed. Pain stopped being chaotic, stopped pulling me in every direction. It aligned. It focused. I began to feel it differently, not as poison, but as fuel. I was angry, not loud, not reckless, focused. Every slight became energy, every rejection became pressure, every lonely night became another layer of control. I learned to sit still with fire in my chest and not let it consume me. I learned restraint, and restraint is dangerous, because when anger is controlled, it doesn't destroy the one who holds it, it forges them. Rage became discipline. It taught me patience. It taught me endurance. It taught me how to suffer quietly without begging for relief. The world thought I was cooling down, thought I was giving up, thought the silence meant surrender. They were wrong. Silence was containment. Stillness was preparation. Something was forming beneath the calm, something dense, something heavy. Power doesn't announce itself when it's born. It tightens its grip first, and I could feel it. The moment I stopped begging, there was a moment, sharp, clear, unforgettable. The last time I reached out, not with anger, not with demands, but with hope still clinging to my voice like a weakness I hadn't killed yet. I remember waiting, watching time stretch thin, convincing myself that silence didn't mean rejection, that maybe they were busy, that maybe I still mattered. That lie lasted longer than it should have. I replayed the words I'd sent, softened them, questioned them, wondered if I had asked for too much by simply wanting to be seen. And then reality answered. It didn't come with words. It came with nothing. No reply, no acknowledgement, no respect, just absence. And in that absence, something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, cleanly. I saw myself in that moment, waiting, hoping, reducing my worth to someone else's response time, and I hated what I saw, not them, me. That humiliation burned deeper than any insult ever could. because it wasn't inflicted, it was chosen. I realized something brutal then. Every time I begged to be chosen, I told myself I wasn't enough on my own. Every unanswered call wasn't just rejection, it was a lesson I kept refusing to learn, until that moment. That was the last time I asked to be chosen. No more explaining myself, no more chasing understanding, no more shrinking my presence to make others comfortable. Something died right there, the version of me that needed permission, the version that confused attachment with value, the version that waited. I let it die, and in its place something colder stood up, straighter, calmer. Pride replaced need, not arrogance, not ego, self-respect. I didn't swear revenge, I didn't curse their names, I simply withdrew my energy completely, because begging teaches the world how to treat you, and silence, chosen silence, teaches it something else entirely. From that moment on, I stopped asking, I decided. And that decision changed the direction of everything. Solitude as a weapon, something changed the day I stopped fighting loneliness and started using it. Alone means uninterrupted growth. No distractions pulling at my focus. No opinions trying to reshape my direction. No limits disguised as advice. When you walk alone, every step is yours. Every mistake teaches you. Every win belongs to you. While others drown themselves in noise, constant voices, constant validation, constant approval, I sharpened myself in silence. They needed crowds to feel real. I needed nothing. Solitude became my training ground. No cheering, no witnesses, just repetition, pressure, and patience. Pain stopped being an enemy. It became structure, a schedule, a discipline. Every lonely night strengthened something in me. Every quiet morning refined my thoughts. Every unanswered message cut away another dependency. Steel is not forged in comfort. It is forged under heat, force, and isolation. Bent, struck, held in fire until weakness burns away. That's what solitude did to me. I learned how to think without interruption, how to move without approval, how to endure without sympathy. A wolf does not ask the crowd how to hunt. It survives because it trusts its instincts, because it moves with purpose, not permission. Crowds are loud because they are unsure. They need consensus to feel safe. They need agreement to feel strong. I didn't. Fire that burns without witnesses burns the hottest. It doesn't perform, it consumes. I stopped explaining myself, stopped justifying my choices, stopped waiting for understanding. Growth accelerated the moment I stopped being accessible. The moment I guarded my energy like a weapon. The moment I realized silence makes people uncomfortable because it gives you an advantage they can't measure. Solitude taught me control. Control over my emotions. Control over my reactions. Control over my direction. And control is power. They thought loneliness would weaken me. They thought isolation would break me down. Instead, it stripped away everything unnecessary. Everything fragile, everything borrowed. What remained was mine, solid, focused, dangerous. Solitude didn't make me small, it carved me into something precise. And precision is what ends battles before they even begin. What you learn when no one is watching, there is a truth you only meet when no one is watching. When there's no audience to impress, no image to protect, no role to perform. Alone, the masks fall. Not because you want them to, but because there's no one left to wear them for. That's when I learned who I really was, not the version shaped by expectation, not the version polished for acceptance, the raw one, the honest one, no performance, no pretending. I saw my strengths clearly, not imagined, not exaggerated, earned. I saw how much I could endure without applause, how long I could move forward without encouragement, how deeply I could focus without distraction. And I saw my weaknesses too. Every excuse I had been hiding behind, every fear I blamed on circumstances, every habit that kept me comfortable instead of powerful. There was no one left to lie to, no applause, no comfort, no lies. That's where accountability was born. I stopped asking why life was unfair and started asking what I was avoiding. I stopped blaming people who left and started confronting the parts of me that needed discipline. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't kind. Self-knowledge never is, but it was clean, precise, unavoidable. I learned what mattered to me when no one was listening. What I stood for when standing alone cost me everything. What lines I would never cross, even if it meant isolation. That's when respect replaced validation. Not respect from others, that kind is temporary, fragile, self-respect. The kind that doesn't need witnesses, the kind that doesn't negotiate with weakness, the kind that stays intact whether you win or lose. I stopped needing approval to move forward, stopped needing reassurance to commit, stopped needing permission to become who I was meant to be. When no one is watching, you either collapse or you sharpen. I sharpened. Because when you know yourself, truly know yourself, you become difficult to manipulate, difficult to intimidate, difficult to break. And that's when solitude stops being lonely. It becomes sovereign. I outgrew the need for belonging. Belonging was the last illusion to die. For a long time, I thought it was safety, thought it was strength, thought it was proof that I mattered. I was wrong. Belonging is a bargain. You trade pieces of yourself for acceptance. You soften your edges, lower your voice, dilute your hunger so others don't feel threatened. Crowds don't build purpose, they dilute it. They pull you toward the average, toward comfort, toward agreement. And agreement is where ambition goes to suffocate. I watched people lose themselves trying to fit shapes they were never meant to fill. Laugh at things they didn't find funny. Believe in things they didn't respect, all for the comfort of not being alone. I understood then why belonging never felt right to me. It demanded obedience, and I was never built to obey, so I let it go. I stopped trying to be understood by people who never listened, stopped explaining my depth to those afraid of silence, stopped translating my vision into language small minds could digest. Independence stopped being lonely the moment it became intentional. Walking alone became a choice, not a punishment, not a wound, a declaration. My identity stopped forming around approval. It formed around direction, around standards, around control. I don't need to be included. I don't need to be liked. I don't need to be validated. I need clarity. I need momentum. I need power over my own path. The crowd moves fast, but it never moves far. It turns when told, stops when afraid. I don't. I move with purpose, not permission. With conviction, not consensus. I don't need to be understood. I need to be unstoppable. And here's the truth they never admit. The moment you stop needing belonging, you become dangerous, because nothing can be taken from you anymore. No approval to withdraw, no group to exile you from, no identity to strip away. When you outgrow the need for belonging, you don't lose connection. You gain sovereignty. And sovereignty is the kind of freedom that terrifies the world. The world fears those who don't need it. There is a moment when the world's tone changes, when dismissal turns into distance, when laughter turns into silence, when people stop leaning in and start stepping back. That's when you realize something important. The world fears those who don't need it. Society survives on dependence, on hunger, on approval, on people who can be guided, bribed, distracted, controlled. But a self-sufficient mind, that's a problem. A lone figure with direction cannot be bought, cannot be flattered, cannot be broken by exile. And once I understood that, I felt the shift. I wasn't ignored anymore. I was observed. Eyes lingered longer. Voices softened when I entered the room. People spoke carefully, as if unsure which version of me existed now. They sensed it. Even if they couldn't explain it, I no longer needed them. And that made me dangerous. Crowds are powerful only when they agree, only when they move together. Only when fear keeps everyone in line. But someone who stands alone doesn't respond to pressure the same way. You can't threaten someone who already accepted isolation. You can't intimidate someone who doesn't need validation. You can't manipulate someone who knows exactly who they are. That's when fear replaces dismissal. They stop calling you strange and start calling you unpredictable. They stop laughing and start watching. Quietly, carefully, I felt it in the pauses. In the way conversations shifted around me. In the distance people kept without realizing why. Power without permission unsettles people. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek approval. It simply exists. And that's when the villain is born, not from cruelty, not from chaos, from independence, from clarity, from the refusal to kneel before systems built on weakness. I didn't declare war on the world. I didn't threaten it. I outgrew it. And the world noticed. Because the most frightening thing you can become is someone who walks forward without asking who's watching or who's following. I was no longer part of the crowd. I was the variable it couldn't predict. And that's when I understood they don't fear my anger, they fear my freedom. This path was never meant for many, I understand it now. This path was never meant for many. Not because it's cruel, but because it's honest. Most people can't sit with themselves for long. They fear silence, fear reflection. Fear the truth that rises when distraction dies. So they surround themselves with noise, with people, with endless movement, not to grow but to avoid. Solitude demands something rare. It demands self-confrontation, accountability, discipline without witnesses. And most people aren't built for that. They need reassurance. They need applause. They need someone to tell them who they are. I don't judge them for it. But I know this path rejects the unprepared. Walking alone is not suffering for the weak. It's terrain reserved for those willing to carry their own weight, those willing to bleed quietly, those willing to become something without being seen. Loneliness isn't emptiness here. It's elevation. It strips away dependency, refines intention, filters out doubt. Every step forward costs something: comfort, belonging, ease. And I paid willingly. I accept the burden of being different, the weight of seeing clearly while others look away. The distance that forms when you refuse to dilute yourself. Pride replaced longing, not loud pride, not fragile pride, the calm kind, the kind that knows exactly where it stands and doesn't need witnesses to confirm it. This path is narrow, this path is lonely, this path is mine. I don't expect company, I don't invite followers. I move forward with certainty because I know what this road creates. Not crowds, not comfort, power. And power was never meant to be shared widely. This path doesn't apologize, it doesn't wait, it sharpens those who endure it. And I endure because destiny doesn't choose the many. It selects the few who don't turn back when the silence gets heavy. I am one of them. The art of walking alone is not an accident, it is an art. An art learned the hard way, refined through loss, mastered through discipline. No one wakes up strong in solitude, you earn it, step by step, scar by scar. Walking alone demands resilience when comfort disappears, self-belief when no one claps, discipline when motivation dies. Most people confuse loneliness with failure. They think being alone means you were rejected, left behind, forgot. They misunderstand the craft. Walking alone sharpens your vision. When there are no voices pulling you sideways, you see straight. You stop chasing approval. Stop negotiating your values. Stop mistaking noise for progress. Purpose becomes clear when distraction is gone. Solitude teaches you to listen to yourself, not the fears planted by others, not the doubts repeated by crowds, your own voice. Calm, uninterrupted. That voice doesn't scream, it doesn't beg, it instructs. Walking alone refines intention. Every action has weight, every decision has consequence. There is no one to hide behind. That accountability is dangerous because it creates precision. This is where power changes form. It stops being loud, stops performing, stops seeking validation. It becomes calm, controlled, authority without announcement. I don't walk alone because I failed. I walk alone because I evolved. I outgrew dependence, outgrew the need to be seen, outgrew the hunger for agreement. The art is knowing when to detach, when to move without witnesses, when to let silence do the work. Because silence forces the world to pay attention. Walking alone teaches patience. It teaches timing. It teaches restraint. And restraint is what separates force from dominance. Anyone can react. Few can wait. Anyone can shout. Few can remain silent while sharpening. This path doesn't rush. It doesn't panic. It doesn't chase, it advances, slowly, deliberately, inevitably. Walking alone is not rebellion, it's sovereignty. You don't reject the world, you simply stop needing it to define you. And when you master that, when solitude no longer threatens you, you gain something rare. Clarity, direction, control. The art of walking alone isn't about isolation, it's about becoming so complete that presence is optional. So when I move forward now, I do it without noise, without permission, without doubt. Because this art has already taught me everything I need to win. Let them watch from a distance. They used to stand close, close enough to judge, close enough to doubt. close enough to leave when it mattered. Now they watch from far away. I don't call them back. I don't explain. I don't announce what I've become. Absence is enough. They expected collapse. They waited for regret. They stayed alert for weakness. Instead, they found silence. No revenge, no confrontation, no desperate need to prove anything. Just distance, and distance terrifies people more than anger ever could, because anger means you still care. Silence means they lost access. I moved forward without witnesses, built without applause, one without acknowledgement. That confuses them. They replay old memories, searching for familiarity. But I am no longer recognizable. They ask questions I will never answer. They imagine stories I will never confirm. Let them wonder, let them assume, let them watch from a distance. My success doesn't call their names. My growth doesn't look back. My silence doesn't need an audience. I don't punish them. I outgrow them. That is the cleanest form of dominance. No explanations, no closure, no final speech made for their comfort, just forward motion. They see the results, not the process. The outcome, not the sacrifice. The power, not the price. And that is unbearable for them, because they know if they had stayed, they would have tried to control it. So I deny them proximity. I deny them access. I deny them relevance. Let them watch from a distance as I become unapproachable. Not because I hate them, but because I don't need them. Silence is not weakness. It is the sound of focus. And while they analyze, guess, and whisper, I continue. Unbothered, unreachable, unstoppable. Let them wonder, let them assume, let them watch from a distance. The return of the one who needed no one. I didn't disappear to be missed. I left to be rebuilt. What returns is not louder. Not desperate, not hungry for attention. What returns is heavier. I walk back into the world carrying silence like armor, every step deliberate, every breath controlled. No hesitation. I don't scan faces for approval. I don't announce my arrival. I don't explain the distance in my eyes. Presence speaks for me now. They feel it before they understand it. The shift, the pressure, the weight of something that no longer bends. I am not here to reconnect. I am here to continue. I don't chase recognition. Recognition chases relevance, and I outgrew that game. I don't need to be welcomed. I don't need to be remembered fondly. I need to be undeniable. The world notices when someone returns unchanged, but it freezes when someone returns sharpened. Because this version cannot be negotiated with, cannot be guilted, cannot be distracted. I learned too much in isolation, about discipline, about restraint, about the kind of power that doesn't announce itself. I don't rush. I don't react. I don't explain my silence. I let it work. Eyes forward, back straight, no hesitation. This is not vengeance. This is alignment. Everything unnecessary fell away. Every weakness was addressed. Every illusion burned. What remains is intention. I don't need allies to move forward. I don't need permission to take space. I already earned it. They will say I changed. They're wrong. I became exact. This is the final form of the anti-hero, not angry, not reckless. Calm, focused, unmovable. I needed no one to become this. And that is why the world feels smaller now. Because I return not to fit back in, but to stand exactly where I belong. Unshaken, unimpressed, unstoppable. I walk alone and I am unbreakable. This is where it ends, and where I begin completely. I no longer question the distance between me and the world. I wear it, I own it, I became it. Solitude is not something I survived. It is something I accepted. Something I mastered. Something I turned into my name. I don't ask to be chosen anymore. I don't wait to be understood. I don't bargain for loyalty, love, or mercy. I removed myself from the auction of approval. And in that silence, I found power. Look at me. Not the version that begged, not the version that doubted, not the version that tried to belong. Look at what remains. A will that doesn't bend, a spine that doesn't crack, a mind that doesn't ask for permission. I don't need their praise. I don't need their fear. I don't even need their respect. I move without it. I learned what most people never will. That attachment creates leverage. That hope can be used against you. That love, when conditional, is a chain, so I drop the chains. I don't hate the world. I outgrew it. Anger is loud. Power is quiet. I don't threaten. I don't warn. I don't explain. I simply continue. Every scar taught me precision. Every loss taught me restraint. Every moment alone carved something unbreakable into my core. I am not fearless, I am beyond fear, because fear requires something to lose, and I already lost everything that could control me. This is what freedom looks like. Cold, clear, unapologetic. I was abandoned. I adapted. I ascended. No crowd behind me, no hand to hold, no voice to echo my name. Just forward motion, just certainty, just dominance without noise. I walk alone, and that is why I win. They trained you early, before you had language for power, before you understood choice. They taught you to explain yourself, to justify your tone, your thoughts, your ambition, your silence. You learned to speak carefully, softly, as if every sentence had to earn permission to exist. You stood in invisible courtrooms day after day, defending crimes you never committed. Your confidence was questioned. Your boundaries were challenged. Your intentions were put on trial, and you spoke. Because you thought you had to. You learned to clarify when you were misunderstood. To apologize when you were disrespected. To explain when you were doubted. Not because you were wrong, but because resistance made others uncomfortable. So you adapted. You shrank your truths into digestible pieces. You diluted your fire so it wouldn't scare them. You learned to smile while being dissected. They asked for reasons. You gave them reasons. They asked for motives. You gave them motives. And every time you did, you handed them something they didn't deserve: control. Explanation was never about understanding. It was about submission. Because the moment you explain yourself, you accept the role they assign you: the accused, the suspect, the one who must prove worth. You spoke while already declared guilty. You defended yourself in rooms where the verdict was decided before you arrived. And still you explained. Again, again, again. They trained you to believe silence was weakness, that not responding meant losing. That clarity was your responsibility, even when confusion was deliberate. But look closer. Every explanation was a concession, every apology a lowering of rank, every clarification a tightening of the chain. Words became handcuffs, sentences became restraints, your honesty became something they could twist. The world didn't reward your truth, it rewarded your compliance. The quieter you made yourself, the more acceptable you became. The more you explained, the more they demanded. Explain yourself. Again, 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 until one day something in you noticed the pattern. You weren't being heard, you were being managed. And that realization, quiet, uncomfortable, undeniable, was the first crack in the conditioning. The first moment you sensed it. This wasn't communication, it was control. Every explanation gave them power. Not because your words were weak, but because the moment you spoke, you stepped down. You thought you were clarifying, they were measuring. You thought you were defending yourself. They were deciding how much to take. Because when you explain, the listener becomes something dangerous. Judge, jury, executioner, they sit higher the longer you talk. They grow comfortable while you grow smaller. You felt it, didn't you? The more carefully you chose your words, the more authority they claimed over them. You bled information in the open and they watched it spill. Details, motives, emotions, doubts. Every sentence another drop, every pause another opening. You weren't being understood. You were being mapped. They learned where to press, where to twist, where to hurt without leaving marks. Misunderstanding was never accidental. They understood you perfectly. They just pretended not to, because confusion keeps you talking, and talking keeps you kneeling. You fed wolves reasons to bite, and then wondered why they circled closer. You handed them context, and they turned it into leverage. You gave them honesty, and they used it as a handle. They asked innocent questions with predatory patience. They nodded, they waited, and with every explanation you lowered yourself further, kneeling with words instead of chains. Look at the pattern. When you explained, they didn't soften. They sharpened. When you clarified, they didn't listen. They calculated. When you apologized, they didn't forgive. They remembered, because explanations don't balance power, they transfer it. The one who explains seeks permission. The one who listens decides whether to grant it. And they liked that position. They thrived in it. They didn't want clarity. They wanted leverage. They wanted you busy proving yourself instead of becoming yourself. They wanted you trapped in language while they moved freely through judgment. Every word you offered was a step backward. Every justification a surrender disguised as maturity. And the anger didn't come all at once. It crept in. A tightness in your chest. A pause before answering. A quiet question forming behind your teeth. Why am I the one explaining when they're the ones benefiting? That question changed everything. Because once you see the exchange, once you recognize the imbalance, you can never unsee it. And power once revealed never returns to its old shape. You thought if you spoke better, they'd treat you better. If you chose softer words, if you smiled more carefully, if you explained your pain without making them uncomfortable. You believed respect was a language problem, that dignity could be earned through perfect phrasing. So you tried. You rewrote yourself endlessly. Edited your truth mid-sentence, swallowed sharp edges and called it growth. You polished wounds until they shined so others wouldn't have to look too closely, so they wouldn't feel guilty for causing them. You made your pain presentable, digestible, small. You tried, you adjusted, you suffered. You thought honesty would be rewarded, that if you showed them your heart, they would finally handle it with care. But honesty didn't earn respect. It invited inspection. They leaned closer, not to understand, but to see how far they could push. Every clarification became an opening. Every vulnerability became a tool. You didn't become clearer to them. You became easier to question, easier to doubt, easier to dismiss. And the more you refined your words, the more they raised the standard. Not because you were improving, but because they enjoyed watching you chase approval that never came. You shrank to be tolerated, folded yourself into smaller versions. Cut pieces off and called it compromise. Still not enough. Still too intense. Too quiet, too honest. Too much, not enough. That's when the disillusionment set in. The quiet realization that landed heavy in your chest. It was never about how well you spoke. They didn't want better words. They wanted a quieter you. They wanted you uncertain, second-guessing, always one sentence away from proving your worth. Because someone busy explaining themselves is someone not standing their ground. And that's when it hit you. No amount of refinement earns respect from people who benefit from your self-doubt. No perfect sentence turns wolves into witnesses. You weren't being misunderstood. You were being managed. And once you see that truth, once it settles into your bones, you stop trying to sound acceptable and start sounding dangerous. Silence was never weakness. It was unused power. They taught you that silence meant surrender, that if you didn't respond, you lost. That if you didn't defend yourself, the story would swallow you whole. So you spoke and spoke and spoke until your voice felt rented, until your words no longer belonged to you. Then one day something shifted. You stopped answering questions that weren't asked in good faith, stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, stopped feeding fires that survived only because you kept throwing yourself into them. And in that moment, silence changed shape. Silence became a closed door. Not slammed, not dramatic, just shut. No access, no entry, no audience. You realize something dangerous then. Silence doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means you refuse to say it to them. Silence removes leverage, removes reaction, removes the pleasure they get from watching you scramble. No defense, no justification, no explanation. They reached for your reasons and found nothing. They waited for your apology and heard nothing. They expected resistance and received absence. That absence unsettled them more than anger ever could, because anger keeps you connected. Silence cuts the wire. You became a locked vault, not empty, sealed. Everything valuable stored inside, nothing handed out for free. Your silence wasn't confusion anymore, it was selection. You were choosing where your energy went, who deserved your voice, who didn't. Like a blade still in its sheath, you didn't need to prove sharpness. You let them wonder, you let them project, let them assume. Let them invent stories to fill the space you no longer occupied. And the truth, people fear what they can't read. They fear what doesn't react. They fear what refuses to perform. Silence denies them the courtroom they built for you, denies them the trial, denies them the verdict. No defense, no justification, no explanation. And in that quiet, something awakened. A calm that didn't need approval. A presence that didn't ask permission. A power that didn't announce itself. You stopped bleeding information, stopped giving away pieces of yourself to people who never intended to protect them. Silence became strategy, control, dominance, and that's when you understood the truth they never wanted you to learn. The moment you stopped explaining yourself was the moment they lost all control. There was a moment, small, unannounced, easy to miss if you weren't the one standing inside it. No speech, no warning, no dramatic exit, just a decision. I remember it clearly. Not because it was loud, but because everything inside me went quiet. That was the moment I stopped explaining, not out of fear, not out of defeat, but out of clarity. I realized I had been answering questions that were never asked to understand me, only to measure me, control me, reduce me, so I stopped, mid-thought, mid-expectation, mid-pattern. I let their questions rot unanswered, and something strange happened. The room felt heavier, not tense, heavier, like gravity shifted. Faces changed. Eyes searched me for the old reflex, the apology, the justification. It didn't come because I didn't disappear. I withdrew access. That's the difference they never prepare you for. Disappearing is weakness. Withdrawing access is sovereignty. I didn't owe them context anymore. Didn't owe them comfort. Didn't owe them clarity. My silence wasn't confusion. It was decision. I watched them grow uncomfortable in the space I refused to fill. Watched them stumble over the emptiness. Watched them realize they no longer had a script for me. That's when I felt it, not rage, calm rage, the kind that doesn't shake your hands, the kind that sharpens them. I stopped reacting, stopped correcting, stopped bending myself into sentences they could digest. I became still. And stillness terrified them because reaction is permission, reaction is access, reaction is control. I gave them none of it, no explanation, no defense, no translation. They leaned in. I leaned back. They demanded clarity. I offered silence. They wanted me smaller. I became unreachable. That was the turning point. The moment I stopped being a participant and became an observer. The moment I realized power doesn't argue. It doesn't justify. It doesn't beg to be understood. It stands and lets the world adjust. I didn't disappear. I withdrew access. And in that withdrawal, something irreversible happened. I stopped needing permission to exist as I am, stopped negotiating my presence, stopped auditioning for acceptance. The air grew heavier because I was no longer carrying their expectations for them. They felt the absence, they felt the loss, they felt the shift, and I felt free, not loud, not reckless, free, because the day you stop explaining is the day you stop being controlled. And once you taste that silence, you never speak the same way again. Something changed when I stopped speaking, not inside me, around me. The ones who fed on explanations felt it first. You could see it in their eyes, that flicker, that quiet panic, because control needs language, it needs narrative, it needs something to twist. And suddenly there was nothing. They asked. I didn't answer. They waited for clarification. I gave them space. They searched for meaning in my silence and found only their own reflection staring back. That's when confusion replaced control. They had built authority on my words, on my reactions, on my need to be understood. Without it, they were exposed. People started guessing, filling the emptiness with theories, projecting intentions I never confirmed. Whispers spread, soft at first, then frantic, but whispers with no confirmation are powerless. Rumors starve without fuel. Manipulation dies without material. They ask. I didn't answer. No narrative to hijack. No sentence to bend. No emotion to provoke. And the ones who once stood tall on borrowed certainty began to shrink. I watched their confidence evaporate. Watched authority crack without a sound. Watched them lose grip on a story they no longer controlled. Silence turned the spotlight back on them. Every question they asked exposed their need. Every demand revealed their fear. Every attempt to pull me back into conversation proved how desperate they were for access. They asked. I didn't answer. And in that refusal, power shifted. Not violently, not dramatically. I didn't confront them. I outgrew them. They tried to provoke, tried to bait. Tried to resurrect the old version of me who would rush to explain. That version was gone. What stood in its place was something colder, calmer, unreachable. I learned something watching them unravel. Those who need explanations to feel powerful were never powerful at all. They were parasites of clarity, predators of openness, kings of borrowed ground. When the ground disappeared, so did their throne. They asked. I didn't answer. And in that silence, I didn't just deny them words. I denied them control. I didn't need to win. I didn't need to dominate. I simply stopped participating in my own manipulation. And that was enough to make them afraid. Something else happened after confusion, fear, because unexplained people can't be controlled. They can't be predicted. They can't be managed with rules written for louder souls. Silence made your intentions unreadable. And unreadable intentions terrify those who live by manipulation. You became a question with no answer. A locked file with no access code. A weapon no one could measure. They started watching you differently. Not with authority, with caution. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't announce power. You didn't threat. And that's what made you dangerous. Because power that doesn't perform doesn't ask permission. Silence turned you into a figure in the dark, not hiding, waiting. They couldn't tell if you were angry, or calm, or calculating 10 steps ahead. They couldn't provoke you into revealing weakness. Couldn't bait you into explaining motives. Couldn't pull a reaction out of you to study. They tried. They always tried. A careless comment, a subtle insult, a manufactured misunderstanding. Nothing, no defense, no justification, no explanation, and that's when it clicked for them. They fear what they can't provoke, because provocation is control, reaction is access, explanation is entry. You denied them all three. Mystery began to surround you like armor, not loud, not aggressive, impenetrable. They whispered about you now, not because you spoke, but because you didn't. Every silence made them invent stories. Every unanswered question made them assume worst-case intent. And fear grows fastest in empty spaces. You watched the shift happen, the way conversations stopped when you entered, the way confidence softened around you, the way people measured their words more carefully, not because you demanded respect, but because silence commanded it. You weren't unpredictable, you were sovereign. And sovereignty scares those who rely on control. They realize something dangerous. You didn't need their approval, didn't need their understanding, didn't need their permission to exist as you are. You had stepped outside their system, and anyone outside the system becomes a threat to it. Silence didn't make you invisible. It made you undeniable, a presence without explanation, a force without narration. A will that couldn't be bent with language. They kept watching, kept guessing, kept wondering when you would finally speak. You let them wonder. Because fear is louder than any words you could have used, and now they know. You are not quiet because you are weak. You are quiet because you no longer need to be understood to be powerful. Silence taught you something words never could. It showed you who was never listening, only waiting, waiting for access, waiting for leverage, waiting for you to crack the door again. Silence filters people, not gently, not politely, precisely. Those who deserved you stayed calm. They didn't chase explanations, didn't demand clarity, didn't feel threatened by your quiet. They respected the pause. The rest exposed themselves. The ones who grew restless, the ones who felt offended, the ones who acted entitled to your inner world. They weren't confused, they were deprived. Because when someone demands an explanation, what they're really demanding is access they never earned. Not everyone deserves access. Say it again. Not everyone deserves access. Silence revealed how many relationships survived only because you kept bleeding words into them. How many bonds were powered by your effort alone. How many people felt important only because you kept explaining yourself smaller. When you stopped, they disappeared. And that absence felt clean. Empty rooms replaced crowded confusion. Quiet nights replaced emotional labor. Clean boundaries replaced constant obligation. Peace didn't arrive with noise. It arrived with space. You stopped performing loyalty. Stopped proving worth. Stopped negotiating your right to exist as you are. You realized something sharp. Anyone who needs you to explain yourself does not respect you. They tolerate you conditionally. And conditions are chains. Silence broke them. You didn't cut people off in anger. You let them drift in truth. No confrontation, no speeches, no dramatic exits, just withdrawal, access revoked. And in that distance, clarity settled in. You saw who reached out with care, not curiosity. Who stood with you without a story, who didn't panic when they weren't in control. Those people stayed. The rest faded into noise you no longer heard. Not everyone deserves access. Not everyone deserves explanation. Not everyone deserves to know you. And that understanding didn't harden you. It purified you. Because silence didn't make you lonely. It made your world honest, smaller, quieter, stronger. And for the first time, your peace was no longer negotiable. The world runs on noise. Endless opinions, endless outrage, Endless reactions screaming for attention, everyone talking, everyone proving, everyone begging to be seen. Noise is the currency of the insecure. The loudest voices aren't powerful. They're hungry, hungry for validation, hungry for agreement, hungry for someone, anyone to confirm they exist. They mistake volume for impact, reaction for control, attention for authority. But you learned something different. You chose stillness. While they burned themselves out in arguments, you conserved energy. While they chased applause, you studied outcomes. While they fought storms, you became gravity. Storms are loud. They terrify the surface. They shake windows. They demand attention. Gravity never raises its voice, and nothing escapes it. Fireworks explode once, bright and brief, gone before the smoke clears. Tectonic plates move in silence, and when they shift, cities fall. You stopped competing with noise because you realized noise always loses. It reveals intention, it leaks weakness, it exposes desperation. Silence does the opposite. Silence withholds, silence watches, silence waits. And waiting is not weakness when you control the moment of impact. Look around. The ones shouting the most are reacting to forces they don't understand. The ones speaking endlessly are trying to convince themselves. The ones demanding answers are afraid of what they can't predict. You gave them nothing. No reaction, no explanation, no fuel. And suddenly the balance shifted. They felt it, because power doesn't announce itself. It settles, quietly, heavily, inevitably. You don't argue with noise. You don't correct it. You don't chase it. You let it exhaust itself, because noise needs an audience. Stillness does not. Noise fades, stillness remains. Say it slowly. I don't compete with noise. I outlast it. And in a world addicted to sound, your calm became dominance. Not dramatic, not emotional, not loud, just final. Silence stopped being something you used. It became who you are. At first it was protection, a shield, a way to survive without bleeding in public. But somewhere along the way it hardened. It settled into your bones. It reshaped your presence. Now silence is not defense. It is authority. You don't explain your intentions anymore because intention doesn't need translation when power is consistent. You don't announce your plans because announcements are for those who need permission. You don't warn people because warnings are mercy and mercy is optional. You learned that words invite debate. Silence invites attention. Words create arguments. Silence creates tension. And tension bends rooms. Look at yourself now. Your eyes don't flinch, not when challenged, not when provoked, not when misunderstood. You stand still while others adjust themselves around you. Your posture doesn't ask. It doesn't lean forward. It doesn't seek approval. It waits. And waiting, when done from certainty, is domination. They don't know what you're thinking anymore. They don't know what you want. They don't know where the line is, and that terrifies them because predictable people are controllable. Unreadable people are not. Your calm has no cracks, no leaks, no tells. They search your face for reactions and find nothing. They listen for explanations and hear silence, not empty silence, heavy silence, the kind that fills the room. The kind that makes people second guess their words, their tone, their position. You don't clarify because you don't need to. Your actions speak fluently. Every move you make lands without subtitles. Every decision echoes without justification. You stopped trying to be understood the moment you realized understanding was never required. Respect doesn't come from explanation. It comes from consistency. And you are consistent, still, unmoved, unapologetic. Silence didn't erase you. It defined you. You are not quiet because you are unsure. You are quiet because you are certain. And certainty doesn't raise its voice. The day you stopped explaining, they lost all control. Not because you shouted, not because you rebelled, not because you fought back in the ways they expected, but because you removed access. Understand this. Control has never required force. It only requires permission. And every time you explained yourself, you gave it. Every justification was a key. Every clarification, a door left open. Every apology, a signature at the bottom of a contract you never agreed to read. You thought explanation was fairness. You thought it was maturity. You thought it would earn understanding. But explanation was consent. Consent to be analyzed. Consent to be judged. Consent to be rewritten by people who never intended to respect you. They didn't need truth. They needed entry, and you kept letting them in until you didn't. The moment you stopped explaining, something shifted. They leaned forward. You leaned back, they asked questions. You offered nothing. They searched for reasons, for angles, for leverage, and found silence, no access, no leverage, no control. Watch what happens to people when they can't provoke a reaction. They panic. Because they don't know where they stand anymore. They don't know how to frame you. They don't know how to manage you. Their scripts stop working when you stop delivering lines. They can't twist your words if there are no words to twist. They can't weaponize your honesty if you no longer hand it to them. They can't command your behavior if they don't understand your motives. And that's when they realize how much power they lost. You didn't disappear. You didn't withdraw from the world. You withdrew permission. You took back the narrative by refusing to narrate. You let the silence do the speaking because silence doesn't negotiate. It dictates. Look at them now. Uncomfortable, guessing, overthinking. Trying to pull you back into explanations, into justifications, into the old hierarchy. But you don't respond, because you understand something now. Authority only exists where access is granted, and you revoked it. No access, no leverage, no control. Say it again. No access, no leverage, no control. You didn't rebel, you went quiet. And in that quiet, you rose above their reach, not angry, not reactive, not desperate to be understood, just untouchable. That's when they lost you. And that's when they lost everything. You owe no one an explanation, not for who you are, not for what you chose, not for what you refused to become. They taught you otherwise, didn't they? They trained you to justify your breath, to soften your edges, to translate your pain into something convenient for them. But understand this now. Explanation was never about clarity. It was about control. A system that demands justification is a system that assumes you are guilty by default. Guilty of existing without permission. Guilty of choosing yourself without consensus. And you're done playing that role. Silence is not avoidance. Silence is self-respect. It is the moment you decide that your life is not a courtroom and you are not on trial. You don't owe your story to people who only want ammunition. You don't owe your reasons to those who benefit from your doubt. You don't owe your truth to anyone who hasn't earned your trust. Power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't argue. It doesn't clarify. It doesn't beg to be understood. It stands, look at yourself now, calmer, heavier, unmoved, not because you're cold, but because you're finished wasting energy on people who never listened anyway. You learned something they never expected you to learn. That silence is not emptiness. It is a boundary, a locked door, a closed gate, a decision. And the moment you stopped explaining, you stopped shrinking. You stopped negotiating your worth. You stopped editing your identity. You stopped leaking pieces of yourself into mouths that could never hold you with respect. They don't know what you're thinking now. They don't know what you're planning. They don't know where they stand with you. And that terrifies them because confusion is the price of lost control. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't seek revenge. You didn't demand acknowledgement. You simply withdrew access. And in doing so, you reclaimed everything. So let them guess. Let them assume. Let them lose control. You are not here to be explained. You are here to be felt. And if they don't understand you anymore, good. That means you're finally free. The day I stopped explaining was the day I became untouchable. They expected you to break loudly. Do you hear that? The silence. That is the sound of their disappointment. When the blow finally came, when the hammer dropped, they were not looking at the weapon. They were looking at you. They were leaning in, waiting, hungry. They were waiting for the sound of you shattering. There is a script they wrote for this moment long before it happened. In their minds, betrayal is supposed to be loud. It is supposed to be a spectacle, a chaotic symphony of weeping and gnashing teeth. They expected you to fall to your knees. They expected the undignified scramble for answers. They expected you to scream at the sky, to tear at your clothes, to demand to know why, because that is what victims do. That is what the broken do. They wanted the noise. They wanted the chaos. They wanted to see the foundations of your world crumble so they could nod their heads and say, look how weak they truly were. But you didn't make a sound, and that is what confuses them. Consider the nature of the wound. It wasn't a stranger in a dark alley. It wasn't an enemy you saw coming from a mile away. It was the handshake that turned into a vice grip. It was the smile that hid the poison. There is a brutal truth about pain that nobody tells you until you are bleeding out on the floor. Knives don't hurt because they're sharp. Any piece of metal can cut skin. Any jagged edge can draw blood. That is physics. That is simple biology. No, knives hurt because they're trusted. They hurt because you handed them the blade. You exposed your neck because you thought they were there to protect it. And in that split second when the steel went in, the pain wasn't physical. The pain was the sudden, violent death of your reality. Shock. It hits you like a cold wave. The air leaves the room. The world tilts on its axis. You look at them. You look at the people you built, the people you saved, the people you loved, and you see nothing but the blank stare of indifference. And in that moment, the world leans closer. They watch betrayal like it is entertainment. They treat your agony like a spectator sport. They want to see the blood. They want to consume your suffering. They want to feast on the wreckage of your life. React, respond, explain. That is the trap they set for you. They want you to defend yourself against a crime you didn't commit. They want you to beg for clarity where there is only cruelty. They want you to exhaust yourself trying to rationalize the irrational. React, scream, throw something, give them the show they paid for, respond, send the texts, make the calls, write the long, desperate paragraphs trying to fix what they broke on purpose. Explain. Tell them how much it hurts. Show them your wounds so they can see exactly where to strike next. They expected a collapse, an explosion, a loud, messy, public death of your spirit. But you are still standing, you are breathing, you are watching them watch you. And the silence you are giving them, it is louder than any scream. It is the silence of a structure that refused to fall. They expected a victim. They expected a tragedy. But as the shock fades and the hurt begins to curdle into something else, they are starting to realize they made a miscalculation. They leaned in, waiting for the crash. But the only thing breaking is their control over you. You think the knife in your back was an accident. You think the betrayal was a momentary lapse in judgment, a mistake born of confusion. Wake up. There are no accidents in the architecture of pain. It was never about the lie. It was never about the cheating, the abandonment, or the broken promise. Those were just the instruments. The betrayal itself was a calculation, a cold, precise measurement. They were auditing your soul. They built a stage beneath your feet, a rigged platform designed to collapse the moment you felt safe. And then they watched. They stood in the shadows of the wings, holding their breath, waiting for the performance they believed they were owed. They wanted to know one thing, just one. Do I still own him? Do I still control her? Every lie was a probe. Every dagger they twisted was a question asked in violence. Can I still make you bleed on command? Is my name still the trigger that destroys your peace? They betrayed you to see how much power they still had. Think of the predator in the tall grass. It doesn't strike the moment it sees the prey. It waits for the flinch. It waits for the panic. It feeds on the fear before it ever tastes the flesh. They were starving for your reaction. They needed your rage. They needed your tears. They needed you to scream, to beg, to write paragraphs of desperate text messages, to show up at their door, to fall apart in public. Your pain was supposed to be their fuel. Your chaos was supposed to be the monument to their importance. They designed a trap that only works if the victim struggles. But then something happened that wasn't in their script. The smoke cleared, the dust settled, and you were still standing. You didn't scream, you didn't lash out, you didn't play the part of the broken victim. You went silent, and that silence was a ghost they didn't know how to fight. You failed their test, and let me tell you, it was the most beautiful failure of your entire existence. They expected a storm, and you gave them a void. They expected a fire that would burn the world down, and you gave them ice. Cold, unforgiving, absolute. You looked at the devastation they caused, and you didn't offer them a single drop of your energy. Do you understand what you did? You didn't just survive the betrayal. You inverted the power dynamic. By refusing to react, you severed the strings. You showed them the terrifying truth they were trying to hide from themselves. They needed you to validate their existence with your suffering, and you starved them. You failed to be their victim. You failed to be their puppet. You failed to give them the satisfaction of knowing they destroyed you. They betrayed you to see if you were weak, and your silence told them the only thing that matters. You are untouchable. Silence was not weakness, it was refusal. To the unrefined eye, silence looks like emptiness. It looks like a void where a scream should be. It looks like a pause where a plea should exist. They see your closed mouth and they assume you are broken. They assume you are too weak to fight back, too damaged to defend your name. They are wrong. They mistook your quiet for surrender. They mistook your composure for defeat. But you know the truth. We know the truth. Silence was not a lack of words. It was a choice. A deliberate, calculated, devastating choice. It was a refusal. You looked at the chaos they brought to your doorstep. You looked at the toxicity they tried to inject into your veins. You looked at the game they wanted you to play. And you simply turned away. That is not weakness. That is the ultimate display of control. When you denied them your voice, you denied them their fuel. Understand this, betrayers are parasites. They feed on reaction. They starve without attention. They need the drama to prove they matter. They need your anger to validate their betrayal. They need to hear you scream to know that they still have their claws sunk deep into your skin. But when you gave them silence, you cut the supply line. You suffocated their ego. Think of it. Every time you wanted to type that message and you deleted it, that was a victory. Every time you wanted to call them out and you put the phone down, that was a strike. You turned yourself into a fortress with no gates. You became a locked door that they can never open again. They can knock, they can pound against the wood until their knuckles bleed. They can scream your name into the night, but there will be no answer. The lights are off. The house is empty. You have moved on to a place they cannot follow. Your silence is a blade that stays in the sheath. The weak man draws his sword at every shadow. The weak man swings wildly at every insult. But the master knows that the greatest threat is the weapon that is never revealed. You didn't fight them. You transcended them. You looked at the contract of their drama and you burned it. They are waiting for the explosion. They are waiting for the noise. They are waiting for you to break. And instead, you gave them the most terrifying thing a person can face. Nothing, no reaction, no access, no satisfaction. You denied them the privilege of your energy. You denied them the luxury of your time. You denied them the right to occupy a single square inch of your mind. Silence isn't passive. Silence is the sound of you taking your power back. It is the sound of a bridge burning, lighting the way to a future where they do not exist. Let them choke on the quiet. You are free. They kept watching, and that's when fear started. It didn't end when you walked away. That was simply the moment the haunting began. They thought your silence was a pause, a deep breath before the scream, a momentary lapse before the inevitable explosion of grief. So they waited. They sat in the ruins of the relationship, checking their watch, waiting for the dust to kick up. Waiting for the angry text. Waiting for the desperate phone call at 3:00 a.m. Waiting for the public outburst that would prove once and for all that they had broken you. But the clock kept ticking, and the phone stayed dark. And that is when the dynamic shifted. That is when the predator realized they had lost the scent. They started watching. Have you ever felt eyes on you when the room is empty? That is what they became. Spectators in a theater where the screen has gone black. They check your profile, but there are no updates. They ask mutual friends about you, but there are no stories to tell. They refresh the feed over and over, hoping for a sign of life, a sign of pain, a sign of anything. But all they find is a mirror reflecting their own insignificance. And that is when the fear started. Because noise is predictable, anger is predictable, sadness is predictable, but silence is the great unknown. Silence creates a vacuum, and into that vacuum their mind pours its darkest insecurities. Why isn't he fighting for me? Why isn't she falling apart? What do they know that I do? What are they planning? Paranoia is a slow-acting poison, and you fed it to them by doing absolutely nothing. They replay the final moments in their head, dissecting every word, every look, searching for the clue they missed. They look over their shoulder, expecting retribution, but there is no one there. And that creates a terror deeper than any threat you could have spoken. If you had screamed, they would have known they hurt you. If you had fought, they would have known they mattered. But by giving them nothing, you stripped them of their narrative. You took the lead role in their tragedy and you walked off the set. Now they are trapped in a loop of uncertainty. They are waiting for a shoe that will never drop. They are bracing for a blow that will never come. They wanted to be the villain in your story. They wanted to be the reason for your downfall, but you denied them even that title. They weren't just ignored, they were erased from relevance. Noise is how the guilty stay in control. Noise is the camouflage of the liar. Have you ever noticed who speaks the loudest in the room? It is never the man holding the aces. It is never the woman who knows the truth in her bones. It is the frantic soul. It is the guilty conscience trying to drown out its own heartbeat. They scream. They accuse. They write long, winding paragraphs of defense. They spin complex webs of justification, throwing words into the air like chaff, hoping to confuse the wind. They make noise because silence terrifies them. In silence, the truth has nowhere to hide. In silence, their lies hang in the air, naked and trembling. They need you to engage. Do you understand? They need it. A manipulator is a strategist, but they are fighting blind. They rely on your reactions to adjust their aim. If you get angry, they play the victim. If you cry, they play the savior. If you argue, they twist your logic until you are apologizing for things you never did. Your voice is the sonar they use to navigate. Every word you speak is data. Every defense you offer is a map of your insecurities. When you argue, you are participating in a negotiation of reality. You are validating their delusion by treating it as something worthy of debate. But when you offer them silence, you turn out the lights. You leave them stumbling in the dark, swinging at ghosts, unsure of where you stand, unsure of who you have become. Let them be the storm. Loud, messy, destructive for a moment, but ultimately fleeting. You are not the storm, you are the ocean. The storm screams and thrashes on the surface. It demands to be seen, it demands to be feared. But the ocean is deep. The ocean is heavy. The ocean swallows the storm whole and doesn't even ripple. Let them be the fireworks, exploding in desperate bursts of color, begging for attention, burning bright and hot before fading into ash. You are gravity. Gravity does not brag. Gravity does not explain itself. Gravity does not threat. It simply is. It pulls. It crushes. It is inevitable. You do not need to prove your strength by barking back at the dogs at the gate. The lion does not lose sleep over the opinion of the sheep. Stop trying to win the argument. The argument is a trap. The moment you open your mouth, you have already lost because you have admitted that their opinion holds weight. Cut the cord. Let them talk until their throat is raw. Let them scream until they lose their voice. Watch them exhaust themselves against the cold, hard wall of your indifference. I didn't fight them with words. I didn't waste my breath on people committed to misunderstanding me. I didn't argue. I outlasted. Your silence forced them to face themselves. The greatest punishment you can inflict on a traitor is not revenge. It is not violence. It is not a public exposure of their crimes. The greatest punishment is to leave them alone with their own thoughts. For so long, they used your reaction as a shield. As long as you were fighting, they could point at your anger and call you the problem. As long as you were screaming, they could justify their betrayal. They could tell themselves that you were unstable, that you were difficult, that they had no choice but to hurt you. Your noise was their distraction. It allowed them to look away from the rot in their own soul. But then you stopped. You withdrew the distraction, and in that terrifying stillness, you forced them to do the one thing they spent a lifetime avoiding. You forced them to look in the mirror. Your silence became a polished surface, cold and unforgiving, reflecting their true nature back at them. Without your voice to argue with, they were left arguing with the echoes in their own mind. Without your text messages to dissect, they were left reading the script of their own guilt. They stood in the empty room of their conscience, and for the first time there was nowhere to hide. That is when the haunting began, not because of what you did, but because of what you didn't do, because silence is a canvas, and the guilty mind is compelled to paint its own nightmares upon it. They began to project. They began to fill the void with their deepest insecurities. Does he know the full truth? Is she laughing at me? Have they already won? They wondered why you weren't begging. They wondered why the manipulation stopped working. They assumed you had found someone better. They assumed you were plotting a vengeance so dark it didn't need words. They spiraled. They spiraled into a panic of their own making. They created scenarios that never happened. They fought battles against enemies that weren't there. They started conversations in their head where you destroyed them over and over again. You didn't have to lift a finger. You didn't have to whisper a single curse. You simply let the weight of their own actions crush them. By refusing to engage, you trapped them in the prison of their own identity. You left them alone with the one person they truly cannot stand, themselves. You became unreadable and uncontrollable. Control is nothing more than the ability to predict. That is the secret they never told you. That is the mechanic of their manipulation. To control a person, you must know their rhythm. You must know their breaking point. You must know exactly which nerve to press to elicit a scream and which memory to twist to summon a tear. For a long time, you were an open book. You were easy to read. You were easy to steer. They knew that if they pushed you, you would push back. They knew that if they ignored you, you would chase. They knew that if they hurt you, you would bleed out loud for the world to see. You gave them the manual to your own destruction. You handed them the blueprints of your soul and asked them to be gentle, and they used it to tear you apart. But then the silence came, and when you went silent, you burned the manual. You took the map of your emotions and you threw it into the abyss. Do you know what terrifies a manipulator more than resistance? Do you know what scares a tyrant more than a rebellion, a locked file, a blank page, a face that shows absolutely nothing? When you stopped reacting, you became unreadable. And because you are unreadable, you are now uncontrollable. They look at you now and they don't know what they are seeing. They don't know if you are broken or if you are building an empire. They don't know if you are crying in the dark or sharpening a blade in the light. You have become a shadow with no outline. They cannot find the edges of you. They cannot see where your weakness ends and your strength begins. Before, they knew exactly how far they could push you before you snapped. They measured it. They counted on it. But now, you are a weapon with an unknown range. Are you close? Are you far? Are you planning peace? Or are you planning total war? They don't know. And that ignorance is eating them alive. They try to bait you and the bait sits untouched. They try to trigger the old wounds, but the triggers are disconnected. They throw their stones into the well of your silence, waiting for the splash, but they hear nothing. Just the deep, infinite echo of the void. They are losing their grip because they cannot grab smoke. They are losing their mind because they cannot fight a ghost. You have taken away their greatest advantage, their knowledge of you. You are no longer the victim they knew. You are the anomaly they cannot solve. Let them guess, let them panic, let them tremble in the uncertainty you have created. They can fight a warrior, they can crush a hero. But this is different. They fear what they can't provoke. Silence filtered who deserved access to you. Silence is not just a weapon, it is a filter. It is a great, terrifying sieve that separates the gold from the dust. When you were loud, when you were explaining, when you were desperate to be understood, you were surrounded by people. But were they there for you? Or were they there for the show? Were they there for the energy you freely gave away? When you went quiet, the room cleared out. Good. Let them leave. Watch closely who became angry when you stopped speaking. Watch who took your silence as an insult. Watch who demanded an explanation, who pounded on the door, who called you cold, who called you distant. They revealed themselves. Their anger was not born of love. It was born of entitlement. They believed they owned a piece of you. They believed they had a permanent right to your thoughts, your time, and your soul. And when you cut the feed, they didn't feel the loss of a friend. They felt the loss of an asset. They showed you their true face. They showed you that to them you were a resource to be consumed, not a human to be respected. Silence exposed the parasites. But then look at who remained. Look at the ones who didn't panic. Look at the ones who didn't demand you perform for them. The ones who sat in the dark with you and didn't ask you to light a fire. The ones who understood that sometimes the warrior needs to rest his sword. They didn't require justification. They didn't need you to plead your case. They respected the quiet. And now look at your life. The chaos is gone. The static has faded. The nights are quiet now. The frantic notifications have stopped. The draining conversations that went in circles have ended. You have replaced obligation with peace. You have replaced the noise of the crowd with the clarity of the throne. You have built clean, sharp boundaries that cut like a razor. For the first time, you are breathing your own air. You are thinking your own thoughts. You are no longer carrying the emotional luggage of people who never helped you pack. Do not mourn the empty seats at your table. Do not chase the ones who walked away when the music stopped. They were never yours to begin with. You have learned the most important lesson of power. Your spirit is a sanctuary, not a public park. Your mind is a fortress, not a marketplace. You do not owe anyone an entry pass. Close the gates, pull up the drawbridge, and look out at the world with the cold, calm eyes of someone who finally understands their own value. Not everyone deserves to know you. Not everyone deserves to hear you. Not everyone deserves access. They wanted closure, you gave them distance. They came back, didn't they? They always do. After the smoke cleared, after the silence became too loud to ignore, they reached out. They asked to talk. They asked to meet. They used that soft, desperate word that guilty people love so much. Closure. They told you they needed closure. They told you they needed to end things on good terms. They wanted to wrap the wreckage in a neat little bow and place it on a shelf so they could walk away feeling like they weren't the villain in your story. They wanted you to absolve them. They wanted you to look them in the eye and say, "It's okay, I understand, we're good." They wanted you to wash the blood off their hands so they could sleep at night. But you saw the trap. You understood that closure is a gift. It is a mercy. And after what they did, you realized that your mercy bank was empty. So you gave them something else, something far more powerful, something far more devastating. You gave them distance. Vast, cold, infinite distance. You didn't write the final letter. You left the pages blank. You didn't answer the final question. You left it hanging in the air, a sentence with no period, an echo that never resolves. They are still waiting for the other shoe to drop. They are still waiting for the angry outburst or the tearful forgiveness. But you denied them the ending. You left them stuck in the middle of the scene, reading lines to an empty theater. Do you see the brilliance of it? By refusing to give them closure, you denied them peace. You forced them to carry the weight of their betrayal forever. You locked the door and you swallowed the key. They are standing on the porch, knocking on a house that no longer exists. They are sending signals into deep space, hoping for a ping back, but there is nothing but static. You didn't owe them a goodbye. You didn't owe them an explanation. You didn't owe them a roadmap to redemption. You walked away into the fog and you never looked back. Let them search for answers you will never give. Let them live with the ghost of what they destroyed. I didn't offer them a bridge. I burned it so I could see by the light of the flames. I didn't heal them. I healed myself. Your silence became your reputation. It didn't happen overnight. At first, your silence was a shield. You held it up to protect the soft parts of your soul that were still bleeding. You held it up because you didn't have the strength to fight back. But time passed. The wounds scabbed over. The skin grew back thicker. The bone healed harder than it was before. And somewhere along the way, the shield became a banner. Your silence ceased to be a reaction. It became your identity. Look at how the room changes when you walk into it now. Do you feel the shift? Do you feel the gravity tilt in your direction? People don't interrupt you anymore. They don't talk over you. They don't mistake your quiet for weakness. They watch you with a careful, measured respect. Because now they know. They know that you are not the person who offers explanations. You are not the person who scrambles to defend their character against baseless accusations. You are not the person who apologizes for taking up space. You have become the person who simply is. Your reputation precedes you. It is a reputation forged in the fires of your refusal to engage with pettiness. They say you are cold. They say you are distant. They say you are dangerous. Let them talk. They are describing a mountain. They are describing a storm front that hasn't broken yet. You have replaced performance with presence. Before, you felt the need to dance for their approval. You felt the need to fill the awkward pauses with nervous laughter and unnecessary words. You wanted them to like you. Now, you sit in the stillness and you let them drown in it. Your eyes are steady. Your posture is unshakable. You do not fidget. You do not look away. You have mastered the art of the unmoved calm. While they run around trying to prove their worth, trying to be the loudest voice in the choir, you stand there, silent, absolute, and that is infinitely more terrifying to them. Because a man who explains himself is a man who can be argued with. A woman who defends herself is a woman who accepts that she is on trial. But you are the judge. Your silence tells the world that you are done negotiating your value. You are done auditioning for a role in your own life. You have arrived, and you don't need to say a single word to prove it. The nightmare was never your absence, it was your growth. Do you want to know what truly keeps them awake at night? It isn't your absence. It isn't the empty chair where you used to sit. It isn't the silence on the other end of the line. Human beings can adapt to loss. They can get used to a void. No, their true nightmare is something far more specific, something far more terrifying. Their nightmare is the suspicion that without them, you are becoming something greater. They expected you to collapse. That was the narrative they wrote for you. They believed that they were the sun in your solar system, and that without their gravity, you would drift aimlessly into the dark, freezing and alone. They wanted you to be a tragedy. They wanted to look at you from a distance and say, "Look how lost they are without me. Look how broken they became." But you didn't break, and you didn't freeze. You went into the dark, yes, but you didn't go there to hide. You went there to work. You used the silence as a laboratory. You used the isolation as a forge. While they were out there seeking validation, making noise, spinning the same tired webs, you were evolving. You took the pain they gave you and you used it as fuel. You took the insecurities they planted in your mind and you ripped them out, root by stem. You rebuilt your body, you sharpened your mind, you expanded your empire, and you did it all behind a curtain of absolute silence. That is what terrifies a controller. Not that the victim escapes, but that the victim transcends. They fear the version of you that they didn't give permission to exist. They look at you now and they don't recognize the person standing in your shoes. They see a strength they didn't put there. They see a confidence they didn't authorize. They see a level of peace that they cannot disrupt. This is the ultimate rebellion, to grow without their approval, to succeed without their help, to heal without their apology. You cut the supply line and instead of starving, you feasted. You stripped them of the only thing that mattered to their ego, their belief that they were necessary for your survival. And now they look at the walls you built and they realize there are no doors for them. You have locked them out of the transformation. No access, no leverage, no control. They are stuck with the memory of who you were, while the world gets to witness who you have become. They thought they were punishing you with silence. They didn't know they were gifting you the space to become a monster of success. Let them be haunted by the mystery. Let them wonder how you did it. I didn't die in the dark. I didn't fade away. I didn't disappear. I evolved in silence. Let them remember the silence. So here we are, at the end of the noise, at the end of the drama. The curtain falls, but there is no applause. There is no final speech where I list my grievances. There is no dramatic confrontation where I demand an apology. That is what they wanted. That is the ending they wrote in their heads. They wanted the satisfaction of a fight because a fight means they still matter. But I have denied them that luxury. I have ascended beyond the need for their acknowledgement. I have risen above the desire for their regret. My silence is no longer a tactic. It is no longer a shield or a weapon or a filter. My silence is my kingdom. It is the walls of the fortress that they can never breach again. It is the cold, hard ground on which I stand, absolute and unshakable. They will spend the rest of their lives looking for me in the shadows. They will look for the person they thought they broke. They will listen for the voice they thought they silenced. But that person is dead, and that voice is gone. What remains is something they cannot comprehend. A force of nature that moves without sound. A power that acts without announcement. I do not need to tell the world that I won. The victory is in the quiet. The victory is in the peace that settles over my life like a warm blanket while they shiver in the cold wind of their own uncertainty. I leave them with the greatest burden a human being can carry. The burden of the unknown. They will never know what I am thinking. They will never know what I am planning. They will never know how close I came to destroying them and how I chose to simply walk past them instead. Let the silence settle like dust in their lungs. Let it be the heavy air they breathe every time they remember my name. I am not a memory they can rewrite. I am a ghost they cannot exorcise. I am the unanswered question at the end of their sentence. Let them sit in the empty room. Let them check the phone that never rings. Let them stare at the door that never opens. Let them wonder where I went. Let them assume I am broken while I build empires they will never see. Let them remember the day the noise stopped and the fear began. They wanted a reaction. They wanted a war, but I gave them something far worse. My silence after the betrayal became their worst nightmare. The symphony of the insecure. Open your eyes. Look at the world around you. What do you hear? It is a cacophony, a relentless, grinding noise that never sleeps. It is the sound of a billion souls begging to be seen. It is the sound of a desperate humanity screaming into the void, terrified that if they stop making noise, they will simply cease to exist. They call it communication. I call it the symphony of the insecure. Look at them. Watch how they move. Watch how they speak. They are terrified of the quiet. The moment a silence falls, they panic. They rush to fill the air with cheap words, with meaningless explanations, with justifications for their own mediocrity. They are beggars in a crowded market, shouting over one another, hoping that if they scream loud enough, someone, anyone, will throw a coin of validation into their cup. It is pathetic. They explain themselves because they fear being misunderstood. They overshare because they fear being forgotten. They broadcast every thought, every feeling, every minor inconvenience because they believe that attention is the same thing as power. They are wrong. Noise is not power. Noise is a signal flare for weakness. Think of the empty vessel. Place it in the wind and it will rattle. It will shake. It will make a sound that travels for miles. But fill that vessel with gold, fill it with lead. Fill it with something of true substance. It sits heavy. It sits still. The wind can howl around it, but it does not move. It does not make a sound. You must learn to distinguish between the noise of the victim and the silence of the victor. Does the lion bark at the sheep? Does the tiger announce its presence before it strikes? No, the predator does not need to explain itself to the prey. The predator does not seek the approval of the herd. Only the fearful make noise. Only the weak feel the need to broadcast their intentions. You are not one of them. You are not a jester dancing in the court, ringing bells to amuse the crowd. You are the king sitting on the throne, watching the performance with cold, dead eyes. Let them talk. Let them type. Let them scream until their throats are raw. Let them exhaust themselves trying to prove that they matter. You do not need to join their choir. You do not need to add your voice to the static. Stand apart. Stand still. Let the weight of your presence crush the air out of the room. They scream to prove they exist. I stay silent to prove I am in control. The day you stopped explaining, I remember the exhaustion. It sits in my memory like a heavy stone. I remember the desperate nights. I remember the taste of iron in my mouth from biting my tongue, waiting for my turn to speak, just to be unheard. I spent years acting as my own defense attorney in a court where the judge had already sentenced me. I thought that if I just explained it well enough, they would see. I thought that if I could just find the perfect combination of words, the perfect sequence of syllables, the lock would click open and they would finally understand my worth. I was a fool. I poured my soul out on the floor for them. I cut open my chest and bled into a cup, offering it to them, hoping they would drink and taste the truth. But they didn't drink. They just watched me bleed. They watched with a cold, detached curiosity. They watched me deplete myself. They watched me wither away, trying to convince people who were committed to misunderstanding me. And that is when the realization hit me. It hit me like a bullet to the chest. They weren't listening to understand. They were listening to gather intelligence. Every word I spoke was not a bridge to connection. It was ammunition. They were collecting my vulnerabilities. They were cataloging my insecurities. They were taking the raw, honest parts of me that I exposed in trust, and they were sharpening them into daggers to use against me later. I was handing them the blueprints to my own destruction. That day, something inside me broke, but it was the kind of break that happens before a bone heals stronger. The pleaser died that day. The part of me that needed to be liked, dead. The part of me that needed to be understood, buried. The part of me that thought love was a negotiation. I dragged him out into the cold light of reality, and I put an end to his misery. From those ashes, the observer was born. I stopped talking to brick walls and wondering why they wouldn't move. I stopped screaming at the storm and wondering why it wouldn't calm down. I took the script of my defense, the long paragraphs, the carefully worded texts, the heartfelt apologies for things I didn't do, and I struck a match. I watched it burn. I watched the need for their validation turn to smoke and drift away into the black sky. I stopped explaining. I stopped justifying. I stopped auditing my own existence to fit into their ledger. It was the most terrifying moment of my life, and then it was the most liberating. I looked at the banquet of their approval, the scraps of attention they dangled like meat for a starving dog, and I felt nothing but nausea. I turned my back on it. I walked away from the feast I was never invited to. Because in that silence, I found the truth that changed everything. I realized that if I had to ask for a seat at the table, I was already eating scraps. Silence is not empty, it is heavy. There is a misconception about silence. The weak believe it is emptiness. They believe it is a void, a nothingness, a lack of presence. They think that when the noise stops, the power fades. They are wrong. True silence is not empty. It is heavy. It has mass. It has density. It carries a physical weight that changes the atomic structure of the air in the room. Have you ever walked into a room where a king sits or a predator waits? You don't need to hear a sound to know that the atmosphere has shifted. The air gets thin. The pressure drops. Gravity seems to pull a little harder on your shoulders. That is the silence I have cultivated. It is not a passive retreat. It is an active force. It sucks the oxygen out of the conversation and leaves the desperate gasping for breath. When you speak, you dissipate your energy. You scatter your power like dust in the wind. But when you hold your tongue, you condense it. You compress your will into a singularity so dense that it bends the reality around you. I want you to understand the difference. There is quiet and there is silent. Quiet is a reaction to fear. Quiet is the rabbit freezing in the grass, hoping the hawk does not see it. Quiet is shyness. Quiet is submission. I am not quiet. I am silent. And silence is dangerous. Silence is the tiger watching from the tree line, muscles coiled, eyes locked, waiting for the perfect moment to break the neck of its prey. When I stop talking, I become a mirror, a black, polished, unforgiving mirror. They scream at me, they accuse me, they demand answers, and I give them nothing. And because I give them nothing, their words bounce off my shield and hit them in their own chest. They look into the abyss of my refusal, and they see their own insecurities staring back at them. They see their own guilt. They see their own desperation. My silence forces them to sit with the demons they are trying to outrun. It is the calm before the devastation. It is the terrifying stillness of the ocean before the tsunami rises. It is the eye of the storm, perfectly still, while the world around it prepares to be torn apart. They look at me and they see a statue. They think I am dormant. They think I have accepted defeat. But they do not hear the gears turning. They do not hear the strategy forming. They do not hear the absolute conviction hardening in my veins like concrete. You think I have nothing to say? I have 1,000 words, but I am choosing not to waste them on casualties. Do not mistake this stillness for surrender. Do not mistake this pause for hesitation. My silence isn't peace. It's the sound of a weapon loading, the paranoia of the guilty. Do you want to know the most exquisite part of this transformation? It isn't just about the peace it brings me. It is about the absolute terror it brings to them. You see, the guilty mind is a fragile thing. It requires constant reassurance. It needs to know where the boundaries are. It needs to know if it has been caught, if it has been forgiven, or if it is about to be punished. When I used to speak, I gave them a map. I told them exactly where I stood. I showed them my cards. I allowed them to navigate around my emotions. But now I have burned the map, and they are lost in the dark. Human brain cannot handle a void. It is terrified of the unknown. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does the conscience of a traitor. So when I give them nothing, they are forced to fill in the blanks themselves. And let me tell you, they never fill those blanks with hope. They never fill them with optimism. The guilty conscience is a cruel artist. It paints only nightmares. They look at my face, stone cold and unmoving, and they begin to spiral. Why isn't he screaming? Does she know what I did? What is he planning? Why is she so calm? They dissect me. They analyze the tilt of my head. They obsess over the way I walk into a room. They read deep, terrifying meanings into a blink, a breath, a pause. I have become a ghost story they tell themselves at night. It is psychological vivisection, and they are holding the scalpel against their own skin. It is like watching rats in a cage when the lights go out. They scramble. They panic. They bite at each other in the confusion. They are waiting for the blow to land. And the longer I wait, the more they suffer. The anticipation of pain is always worse than the pain itself. And I am stretching that anticipation out into an eternity. I am the predator in the tall grass. They cannot see me. They cannot hear me, but they can feel eyes on them. They know I am there. And they know that I am not just watching. I am assessing. I have turned their life into an interrogation room with a two-way mirror. They are sitting in the chair under the harsh light, sweating, stammering, confessing their sins to their own reflection. And I am standing on the other side, in the dark, watching, judging, amused. I don't have to lift a finger to hurt them. I don't have to whisper a single threat. I don't have to plot a complex revenge. Their own imagination is doing all the heavy lifting for me. They are writing tragedies in their heads where I destroy them over and over again. They are flinching at shadows. They are desperate for a reaction. They are begging for a clue. They would prefer me to scream at them because at least then they would know what I am thinking. But I will never give them that satisfaction. I will leave them in the labyrinth they built. Let them stay awake at 3:00 a.m., staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction, searching for a sign I never gave. Let the uncertainty rot them from the inside out. Let them wonder. Let them guess. Let them be haunted by what I might be thinking. Energy conservation for the kill. Have you ever calculated the cost of a conversation? Have you ever measured the sheer metabolic expense of arguing with a fool? Every word you speak is a leak in the hull of your power. Every sentence you waste on someone who refuses to listen is a hemorrhage of your vital energy. They spend their days bleeding out. They broadcast their intentions to the world. They announce their next move before they have even taken the first step. They are desperate for the applause of the audience, so they perform the tragedy of their own lives on a public stage. They tell you what they are going to build. They tell you how they are going to win. They tell you exactly where they are vulnerable. And while they are busy talking, I am busy working. I have learned the lethal art of conservation. I do not waste a single calorie on performance. I do not waste a single breath on posturing. I take all that rage, all that focus, all that raw drive, and I channel it into one thing: execution. Silence is the ultimate efficiency. It is the perfect insulation for your ambition. Think of the sniper. Does he scream before he pulls the trigger? Does he announce his location to the target? No, he stills his heart. He slows his pulse. He holds his breath until he becomes one with the silence, and you never hear him. You only feel the impact. Think of the viper. It does not rattle like a toy to warn you. It coils. It compresses its muscle into a spring of deadly potential. It waits until you are close enough, comfortable enough, foolish enough. And then it strikes, faster than thought, faster than fear. The element of surprise is the greatest weapon in any war, and you lose it the moment you open your mouth. If I tell you I am coming, you can build a wall. If I tell you I am angry, you can prepare a shield. If I tell you my plan, you can sabotage it. But if I tell you nothing, you are defenseless. You are fighting a shadow. While they are out there building sandcastles with their words, waiting for the tide of validation to wash them away, I am laying bricks in the dark. I am building a fortress of results. I am sharpening the blade of my success in a room where no one can hear the grinding stone. Let them brag. Let them shout. Let them think they are winning because they are the loudest in the room. They don't understand the geography of power. They are standing outside, making noise, demanding to be let in. But I found a different way. While you were barking at the gate, I was already inside the throne room. The aura commanding without demanding. There is a difference between demanding attention and commanding it. The weak man demands. He claps his hands. He raises his voice. He wears bright colors and makes grand gestures, begging the world to look at him, begging the room to acknowledge his existence. He is a child throwing a tantrum in the halls of power. But the master commands without speaking a word. This is the power of aura. This is the weight of true presence. It is not about size. It is not about physical strength. It is about a terrifying level of certainty that radiates from your skin like heat. When you possess this presence, you do not enter a room, you occupy it. You walk through the door and you do not look around to see who is watching. You do not scan the faces of the crowd, searching for a smile of approval or a nod of validation. You do not seek permission to be there. Your eyes do not dart around like a nervous bird. They lock on, they pierce. They do not scan for friends, they scan for targets. They scan for opportunities. They look through the noise and see the structure of the reality beneath. You move with a slowness that terrifies them. Only the prey rushes. Only the victim runs. The apex predator moves at its own pace because it knows that time belongs to it. Think of the mountain. Does the mountain ask the wind for permission to stand? Does the mountain beg the storm to go around it? Does it apologize to the earth for being heavy? No, it simply is. It stands immovable, ancient, absolute. The weather changes, the seasons turn, the people below scream and shout, but the mountain remains. It does not need to explain its height. Its shadow alone is enough to humble everything beneath it. That is what you must become. You must become a black hole in a universe of dying stars. While they burn brightly, desperate to be seen, flickering out in their exhaustion, you simply exist. Dense, heavy, pulling everything toward you with the sheer force of your gravity. Gravity does not negotiate. Gravity does not brag, it just pulls, and they will feel it. They will feel the steel in your spine, steel that was not bought but forged. Steel that was tempered in the fires of betrayal, hammered on the anvil of silence, and cooled in the ice of your isolation. They will look at you and they will not see a person they can manipulate. They will see a fortress they cannot breach. They will see a certainty so absolute that it makes them question their own reality. I do not need to shout to be heard. I do not need to flex to be feared. I do not need to make a scene to be the center of it. I let the weak make the noise. I let the insecure make the speeches. I simply walk in. I don't need to announce my arrival. The shift in the atmosphere does it for me. Words are for the negotiators, and I don't negotiate. Negotiation is a confession of weakness. It is an admission that you do not have the power to take what is yours, so you must beg for a portion of it. It is the sanctuary of the uncertain, the refuge of those who are terrified of conflict. I look around at this world of endless debate, of endless meetings, of endless compromise, and I see a sea of cowards. They trade words because they are afraid to trade blows. They hide behind the nuance of language because the stark, cold reality of action terrifies them. They think that if they talk long enough, if they use big enough words, they can talk their way into power. But I am done with words. Words are for the negotiators. Words are for the people who are still trying to figure out where they stand. Words are for the people who need permission. I know exactly where I stand. And I do not need your permission to remain there. I stand above the noise. I stand on the mountaintop of my own ambition. Do not mistake my lack of engagement for agreement. Do not mistake my silence for hesitation. I am not arguing with you because I do not respect your position enough to debate it. Debate implies equality. It implies that your opinion holds the same weight as my conviction. And let us be very clear, we are not equals. Apologies, excuses, explanations, keep them. Those are the tools of the subordinate. Those are the shields of the guilty. Those are the frantic attempts of a servant trying to avoid the whip. I have no use for them. I have stripped them from my vocabulary. I have purged them from my soul. I deal in absolutes. Like a judge's gavel striking the wood, my will is final. The sound echoes through the chamber and the case is closed. There is no appeal. There is no second hearing. There is no filibuster that can change the outcome. The verdict has been read and the sentence is being carried out while you are still reading the indictment. You are waiting for a dialogue. You are waiting for me to sit across the table, fold my hands, and haggle over the price of my soul. You want me to meet you in the middle, but I have already left the room. I have taken the contract of your expectations, the social contract that says I must be polite, that I must be reasonable, that I must be small, and I have burned it to ash. I watched the embers float away into the dark, and with them went the last of my patience for your games. I have welded the door shut. There is no way back in. There is no renegotiation. The bridge is not just burned. The canyon it spanned has been widened. You want to know who I am? Stop listening to what I say and start looking at what I have done. My language is not spoken. My language is built. It is written in the victories I have stacked while you were sleeping. It is written in the obstacles I crushed while you were complaining. It is written in the empire that stands where nothing stood before. My results are the only voice I need. They scream louder than any speech I could ever give. They thunder over your doubts, so do not ask me for a meeting. Do not ask me for a justification. You want a discussion? Look at the scoreboard. That is my statement. The mystery is the magnet. Human beings are simple, predictable creatures. They are easily bored by the known. They are easily fatigued by the obvious. Give a man the answer and he will nod and walk away. But give him a riddle. Give him a puzzle with a missing piece. He will sit in the dirt and starve to death trying to solve it. They are addicted to the unknown. They are obsessed with what they cannot understand. And that is the secret they never taught you. That is the source of a power so seductive it borders on witchcraft. Oversharing is the death of desire. Look at the people around you. They spill their guts at the first sign of intimacy. They treat every stranger like a therapist. They post every meal, every thought, every heartbreak for the world to consume. And in doing so, they make themselves cheap. They become common. They become a paperback book found in a bargain bin, read once, easily understood, and discarded without a second thought. But you are a book with a locked cover. You are bound in iron and silence. There is no summary on the back. There is no table of contents. And because you are closed, they are desperate to open you. They look at you and they see a void. They see a blank canvas. And because they cannot see the truth, they project their own fantasies onto you. They project their own fears. They turn you into a god or a demon in their own minds, simply because you refuse to tell them which one you are. You have become the dark side of the moon, cold, distant, eternally facing away from their prying eyes, and they cannot look away. It is gravity. It is magnetism. By withholding your essence, you create a vacuum that pulls them in. They are the moths fluttering blindly in the dark. You are the blue flame burning in the distance. They know that the flame is dangerous. They know that the flame does not care if they burn. They know that if they get too close, they might be consumed. But they cannot help themselves. The danger is part of the allure. The uncertainty is the hook that buries itself in their cheek. They circle you. They analyze you. They try to get a reaction just to see if you are real. Let them circle. Let them flutter. Do not give them the light they seek. Do not explain the fire. Maintain the distance. Maintain the fog. Watch how they scramble for your approval. Watch how they fight for a glimpse behind the curtain. Understand the dynamic and you will own their attention forever. They come closer not because they love me, but because they are dying to know what I am. The evolution from man to monolith. There is a breaking point that every soul must reach, but if you survive it, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a transcendence. For years, I was flesh and blood. I was nervous endings and open wounds. I was a creature that could be cut, a spirit that could be bruised by the careless words of others. I sought their warmth. I feared their cold. I was human, all too human, reacting to every shift in the emotional weather around me. But that version of me is gone. I did not just grow up. I did not just get stronger. I evolved. I underwent a metamorphosis of the spirit. The pressure they applied to crush me, it did not destroy me. It did what pressure does to carbon in the deep earth. It turned the coal into diamond. I have shed the soft skin of the victim. I have replaced it with something impenetrable. I have moved beyond the need for their validation. I have moved beyond the reach of their criticism. Do you understand the freedom of that? Do you understand the power of reaching a place where their opinion is not just wrong, it is irrelevant? I am no longer a leaf blowing in their wind, turning whichever way they blow. I am the cliff face. Let them be the ocean. Let them be the storm. Let them crash against me with all their fury. Let them scream and foam and pound against the stone. The cliff does not argue with the wave. The cliff does not ask the water to stop. The cliff simply stands. The wave breaks. The wave scatters. The wave retreats back into the abyss, exhausted by its own violence. But the cliff remains, unmoved, unscathed, eternal. I have become a monolith in a world of sand. I am the statue standing amidst the ruins of a war they started. The smoke clears, the buildings have fallen, the noise has died down, and there I am, still standing, still staring at the horizon with eyes of stone. I have calcified my will into something that cannot be eroded. They try to find a soft spot to stick their knives, but the blade breaks against the surface. They try to find a nerve to trigger, but the wires have been cut. I am immune to their noise. I am vaccinated against their drama. They look at me and they see a person, but they are mistaken. I am no longer operating on their frequency. I am no longer playing by the biological rules of social approval. I have become an unchanging fact. I am as undeniable as gravity. I am as inevitable as the sunrise. I am as permanent as the ground beneath their feet. They can hate the gravity, but they cannot defy it. They can curse the sun, but they cannot stop it from burning. And they can resent my silence, but they cannot break it. I have finished the transformation. I have locked the final door. I am no longer a person you can argue with. I am a reality you must accept. The final verdict. So this is the end of the conversation. This is the moment the talking stops. This is the moment the performance ends. You have spent a lifetime explaining yourself to people who were committed to misunderstanding you. You have wasted enough breath. You have wasted enough time. You have cast enough pearls before swine only to watch them trample everything you offered. The court is adjourned. The verdict is in. And the judgment is final. You are done. You are done asking for permission to exist. You are done apologizing for your strength. You are done shrinking yourself to fit into the small, suffocating boxes they built for you. Stop talking, start being, close your mouth and let your actions become the thunder that shakes the ground beneath their feet. Do not tell them your plans. Do not announce your comeback. Do not promise them revenge. Promises are cheap. Threats are weak. Instead, give them the silence after a gunshot. You know that silence. It is the ringing in the ears after the explosion. It is the shock that follows the violence. It is the moment when the world stands still because it realizes that something irreversible has just happened. Be that silence. Turn your back on the audience. Walk away into the fog. Let the mist swallow you whole. Leave them standing there, trembling in the cold, straining their eyes to catch a glimpse of you, terrified because they no longer know where you are or what you are capable of. Let your absence be felt like a phantom limb, a pain they cannot heal, a loss they cannot replace. Let your presence be feared like a coming storm. Think of the sun. It rises every morning without a sound. It does not scream to announce the dawn. It does not blow a trumpet to warn the night. It simply rises. And yet in its terrible silence, it burns everything. It blinds those who stare too long. It commands the life and death of the entire planet, all without whispering a single word. Be the sun, burn bright, burn silent, burn absolute. The world does not listen when you scream. The world listens only when you stop speaking. So let them watch, let them wait, let them wonder. You have nothing left to say to them. Look them in the eye one last time. Let the silence stretch out until it snaps their nerve. And then turn away. Watch me, don't speak to me, don't ask me, just watch, because what I am about to do has no words.